Hi everyone, welcome to Casual Watch Talk Live. Well, I think we're going to have a spirited show today, but it should be a very interesting one. But before we do that, shall we jump into a wristwatch check? And before we do a wristwatch check, let me just add Mark. Actually, I'll give Mark a second to get set up. TJ, do you want to kick us off? Welcome back. It's been
thank
a long
you.
time.
It's been a tough time, but I'm over the hump, I think. Appropriately, the wristwatch check is the Grail. I'm trying to learn the camera thing, and the left and right is kicking my butt. But at least it's not mirror image. But so I got this for myself as my Navy retirement gift, 25 years, and then I did not get it with the bracelet. I got it used on Chrono 24, but then I ended up getting the bracelet, and it's a big splurge, but I don't regret it because it's phenomenal. And I wish all bracelets were like this because I use the micro adjustment about 5-6 times a day, and it's just the best. So it's awesome to still be in love with your Grail after several months. I wish this level of satisfaction to all watch enthusiasts. And that might tie into other things. That's why I now look at quartz, right? So basically looking for what's the buddy for this watch that'll do all the tough things I don't want to do with this watch on, like work on yard stuff or cars or whatever. I think I've got one of those too, but I'm always on the lookout for better ones. So that's why I'm kind of focused on that side of things lately.
Awesome. I'm going to add in Mark. Hey, Mark, thanks for joining us.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for the invite.
Pete, what are you wearing?
I took it off today because I remember it makes it easier. So I'm wearing the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Diver GMT.
Beauty.
Nice.
So a great, huge, chunky beast of a watch.
Oh, I like it that way.
Yeah, my boss, one of my bosses at work, has the chronograph, the Memovox version of that. Yeah, really cool watch.
The Memovox looks great. It scares me. That alarm function and one day having to get it fixed. That's and to be honest, that fear of what might happen, with alarms and sonories and everything, is a question I haven't heard many people asking about the Belcanto yet. That'll be an interesting experience for a lot of people in a few years, I suspect.
Maybe. Mark, what are you wearing?
I am wearing a Christopher Ward today. This is the Christopher Ward Trident Pro Mark II.
Oh wow! So it's one of the earlier ones.
Yeah, this is from 2014. And to Pete's point about Christopher Ward and the Belcanto, they did make a commitment a couple of years ago to be much better with spare parts than they had been in the past. So we will see. It is their own module, but it would have to go back to Christopher Ward for service. You're quite right.
Awesome. Todd, you're up next. What are you wearing?
I am. So this is a due to me watch, which I'm very excited. I was able to get one at a very good price. And so this is the Seiko, and I'm still working with the camera thing too, DJ. For some reason, it doesn't like to focus too closely because I think it gets, maybe if I do this. This is their Olympic, there it is, Olympic monopusher chronograph from 1964. So these were made for the Tokyo Olympics. This is not an official Olympic one. Those are like hen's teeth and are outrageously priced. These can still be had reasonably, but this one has, and it's hard to see on the back because it's pretty well worn. It's probably going to show up on the camera, but it has the Olympic torch and flame. Maybe I show it down there. It's just really worn, but it's a monopusher chronograph, and it works. Everything works on it. It got it working pretty well on the time grapher. I got it from Singapore, and off an Instagram seller, which is my first time doing Instagram sale, and it worked out fantastic. And so I might be able to hold off having it service. It seems to keep pretty good time.
Yeah, awesome.
Just,
really cool.
Just based on the way it looked right there, it looks a lot like one of those new Presage releases.
I thought there was some design language there, isn't there?
Yeah.
You think? Yeah, isn't that interesting? There is some design language, and in fact, we'll talk about that when we go into.
All right, then. Excellent.
When we go into what makes a brand like hair, what do collectors do? Seiko, and why is it such a great, enthusiast brand?
Absolutely. Todd, what are you wearing?
I was feeling like a two-tone today, so wearing the Tudor 1926 in gold and silver, or gold and steel. But yeah, enjoying this one today.
Oh yeah, really nice.
Very nice.
And then I'll go finally. I borrowed one from one of our subscribers and occasionally joins us on live stream. It's the Tissot PRX. I'm going to do a comparison between this and there's a Casio Edifice that has a similar bracelet, but I don't think anyone's done a comparison between the two yet. This video was an idea from Watch Chris, so I can't take full credit for it. So thanks, Watch Chris. So yes, so thankfully Justin lent me this PRX, and I should be able to do that review soon.
So how comfortable is that bracelet? Now I'm interrupting. Yeah. I'm very curious.
No, it is. Yeah, it's comfortable. Yeah. This is slightly bigger. Justin said I could adjust it, but I feel a bit weird about adjusting it. So it's slightly bigger than me, but the butterfly clasp is nice. Yeah. So if you see, it's just a little bit too big for me, but it is comfortable. Yeah. It's nice the way it kind of all, the links kind of fall together.
I've been toying around with the 35 in quartz. That I like the idea of that.
Yeah, I might go for a quartz of this actually. If this is the auto, I might go for a quartz on it. But awesome. Well, the subject for today is how do watch collectors determine whether a watch is legitimate or not? And I don't mean is it fake or not? That not authentic. We mean legitimate. Like, how do we decide, or how do you decide? Let us know in the comment section. Which brand gets your money? Which is it? The philosophy? Is it history? Is it the story? Is it the type of watch? So, how do you decide whether a watch is legitimate versus another brand that we think, no, they're definitely not legitimate, even though the watches might still look very similar. So, TJ, I kind of stole. This was your suggestion combined with Pete's. So, was that the spirit of it that I captured there?
Yeah, absolutely. What made me think of it was the series of chronographs that have been coming out that you can't read the elapsed time, and so when. For me, I like to think about what the designer is thinking when they're making the watch, what their intent is. And I like it when they intend for something to be useful and they haven't lost sight of it. And what are they thinking is different than what were they thinking? And there's a lot of watches where that seems to be the case. And so that's kind of what I thought of, like, so, especially a lot of these VK Mecha Quartz where, and I think Chris talked about a Citizen Flieger that he had where it was impossible to tell the elapsed time. And so you just kind of wonder why are they making it? And because the stopwatch function looks cool, but if it doesn't measure elapsed time, if you can't read it, then to me, it's not legit. So I always look for that authenticity of purpose and design and the intent. So that's what made me think of it. And I think Pete had a whole other aspect to it that married up real well. So I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I suppose it's one of these things. People say the same words and the same phrases, but put slightly different meanings on things. Authenticity or legitimacy is a huge part of what makes me buy a watch, but it's not necessarily functional authenticity. I got past the idea that a watch was a tool sometime in the 90s. So for me, it's a kind of cosplay jewelry thing. So, and I see as much artistic I require as much artistic authenticity as I do kind of functional. So for me, a watch is a weird mix of, it's kind of functional artistic jewelry. And what I need is some authenticity in each one of those categories. So if it's going to be a watch, it's got to tell the time and it's got to have some basic function. It's got to, the functionality's kind of got to be there. But at the same time, if it's just a rip-off of someone else's, or if it's just a lazy rehash of stuff you've been doing forever and ever and ever, then you're kind of like late years Picasso, hanging around with 17-year-old girls and just pumping out cheap pottery. I don't care. There's no artistic integrity there.
Such
So that-
flowery language.
And
Brilliant.
That was great.
Right,
I love
down for merch ideas for t-shirt ideas.
Yeah, so so that's it. I kind of I have elements of where TJ's coming from. You know, like if you've a chronograph and you can't read it, it's kind of pointless. If you're pretending to be a dive watch and you've got 30 meters water resistance, that's kind of frustrating to me as well. But at the end of the day, it's also balanced with, if you like, and I'll have to say, artistically, are you giving me something that's authentic, that's real, that means something and represents who you are, or are you just stealing someone else's design? So that's where that's kind of me, where I beg off.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, yeah, it's authenticity of design. This is why I'm not a huge fan of purely homage brands. Like I don't mind people moving a design onwards. Like this, arguably, this PRX is moving a design. There's oyster quartzes and things like that came before that had this design, and even I think some classic Tissot's. But it's paying respects to a design. I find that more authentic than something like Steinhardt, where they're just obviously making as close to a Rolex as they can possibly get away with without actually being called a counterfeit watch. I think that is not an authentic way of designing a watch, and that personally is something that turns me off about a brand, is if they're flying too close to the wind with the design where they're heavily borrowing from it. But I don't know who wants to go next. I don't know, Mark, do you want to go next?
Well, I think we use homage in two different ways. The first way is the true homage, which means, it pays respect to the original. Give you an example, the C63 Sealander. It's clearly a paying respect to the original Rolex, but it's not a blind copy of the Rolex. And then we use homage in the pejorative sense, like the Steinhardts that you just mentioned, is that we call them homages, but bad copies might be, or even good copies for some of the Steinhardts, is a more realistic description of them. And I would much rather have a true homage than a pejorative one.
Yeah,
they're really good now. I mean, they're even used the what is it, 904 steel.
Do they 94 steel?
Yeah, in some of the models, they've gone full into Rolex.
Whether it's the same 904 steel is a matter of debate.
That's a true question.
What does it look like in the Steinhardt design department? Just an empty desk with
a big photocopy,
a bunch of laptop cords that aren't hooked up to anything. So it's
there's a guy he's got the Rolex homepage on his computer, and they just reference that.
There's other companies that'll come out and produce what looks like a pretty close copy to something, but if it was an MOD design watch from the RAF that's no longer made, that to me, hey, their intent is to honor something that's super cool and historic, and it's just, you can't get it anymore. And so they, like Newmark is trying to do that. They want to restore that RAF chronograph style, and so that goes back to me to that purpose, right? If the story on their website and they're being true to, they're writing what they really feel, that they're in love with this design and they want to make it accessible. That's different than, hey, the Rolex design is printing money and people love it, but not everyone can afford it. So I'm going to serve the people that can't afford a Rolex by making a Steinhardt that looks just like it. That, to me, there's a place for it apparently, but it's not a place that seems to be comfortable with people who are enthusiasts like ourselves.
Or you can do what Tag did with Carrera's 60th anniversary, the one that came, the Panda dial that came out very recently.
Gorgeous.
I'm about to slate it, so you might want to put that on.
I think it's gorgeous. You go for it. I think it's gorgeous.
They took it from 36 to 39, which may well be having something to do with fitting the new movement into it. But they then start making mistakes with their own heritage. They say it's the 60th anniversary. Well, the Pandas didn't come out until 1968, so no, it's not. And then upscaling it just shows you that that design is quite old-fashioned. Yes, it's a pretty watch, but if they wanted to pay a true homage to it, they could have, I think, done a much better job with it. You know, it doesn't look as good as the upscale one. Some of the case detailing from the 1968 version isn't there. So that's quite a lazy design exercise, however gorgeous it may or may not be.
I think that I will say for the case design, I think they're going for the ability to sell it. I think you're going to lose a lot of people in that 36 place today.
I can't.
I like 36 millimeter watches. I wear them, but I know that it's an immediate no for a lot of guys. And so it's just a way to make sure they can sell this watch. That's the only reason I made that move.
You know, if you look at some of the reviews, the guys from Worn and Wound are going, "Oh, it's a real shame they didn't make it 36." Well, this is the disease of small watches in media these days.
Right?
Yeah. I was going to say I'm in that hard no. If it was a 36, and it's an interesting question. Has anyone ever tried to use a 36 millimeter chronograph? They're nightmarish to read. They're absolutely
I imagine it would be.
Only with a magnifying glass.
Yeah. But TJ, you actually touched on something really interesting. The difference between, I don't like the words, and Mark, you're absolutely right. Homage has this kind of pejorative idea as well. I actually prefer what the fashion industry call those knockoffs. It's a much more, it's exactly what it is. It is, and that's actually the quasi-legal term for something that looks as close as it can to another product but avoids trademark law. That's a knockoff. And I think that's what Pagani and Steinhardt produce. One of the distinctions between someone who's doing a knockoff or even a weak homage and someone who's doing a truly respectful or a true respectful strong homage
is that a tribute?
Or a tribute is the person who is truly paying respect to the original will name the original.
Yeah.
Will name drop it. So they will say on their website, this is a reference to the 1948 Omega chronograph. This is a reference to this whatever watch. As soon as you know that the watch designers know they're on shaky ground, when they can't bring themselves to name the watch from which they drew their inspiration. And continuing my famous tradition of bashing Tudor, this is one of my fundamental problems with Tudor. They will not tell you that they have drawn something from a Rolex when they clearly have.
Sure.
Yeah.
No fight there.
Well, I was going to say, I got a couple things here that I can agree with TJ and disagree with him. I agree mostly with Pete, and Mark brings up a good point. Here we go. So what we have is, I used to have a Borealis Sea Storm 2, which is a homage to the original Blank Pan 50 Fathoms. And I'm okay with those sorts of things. I've got rid of almost all my micro brands, so I just don't have it anymore. But it was a really good way of honoring the original design of the Blank Pan 50 Fathoms, or Blank Palm 50 Fathoms. Because it's not in production anymore, and of course, one of those original watches is $20,000 or so. So that's okay where I am. Other than that, I start to go, yeah, no. But going back to what TJ said, so I have lots of show and tell. Here's an Omega. This is the Speedy right here. It's a good thing Patrick's not on; he would kind of be choking or something like that. So here's the original. This is the 1861 version, so it's right before the new one. There we go. So this is ultimate legibility, right? That's one of the things. It was one of the reasons it was chosen for the NASA Apollo program, and it was used by astronauts before that too, right? You can't miss this. What this is telling you, it's uncluttered. There's no date. I know Sam hates that, but I mean, really, for its purpose, that's great. Now, if we look at what this is here, here's my Mont Blanc, Nicholas Ryasek. This honors Nicholas Ryasek, who may have made the first chronograph back in the 1800s, which was really something that sat on your desk to time horse races. If you look at that original one, which Mont Blanc talks about a lot, then you have this. But guess what? The chronograph dials are the small discs. They spin, and the pointer stays stationary. There's Patrick. So is this legible to actually use? This is also a GMT. So this got packs a ton of functionality. Is this legible? If I'm going to seriously do some timing things on my wrist, am I going to use this? Probably not. But the design, the purpose of the design, to what Pete was saying, is it's intentional. And it's supposed to be this way. And if I want to use a chronograph, then I'll use something else that's designed to be more clear and be able to give me the information I want. Now, going back to what Mark said about Homage is like from the Horia one. Yeah, I like it, but that I'm with Todd on that one. But Seiko has notoriously done their own homages horribly. They don't seem to oftentimes have a sense of their own history, and it drives me bonkers that they can't get that right until I would argue what Sam has now, the new speed timer chronograph, the solar one. There it is. I think that's, in my opinion, is the best one they've done so far. It's not exactly like any of them because they never made a triple dial watch, one of these until they went to quartz. But if we look at that, and again, we're coming up here again. So here's the first three. This is the first analog quartz chronograph ever made. Seiko started this in 82. This is or 83. This is in 84. And so this was never done before. These are all stepper motors. There's 15 joules. This thing will last many lifetimes. It'll last hundreds of years if you keep it going. This one survived my house fire and it had to be rebuilt. But this is probably close to what Sam's. None of the automatic ones, but this is probably close to what Sam's is in some way. And that is, finally Seiko is honoring their own heritage, I think, with using modern technology. So anyhow, I wanted to hit all three. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. I'm done. You can disagree.
Yeah, we've got some good comments coming in from the audience here. But Todd, do you want to go next?
Well, I have this might be a Marmite state or comment, but it kind of goes between both what TJ said and Pete said. I'm kind of a fan of what Dan Henry does in that realm, in that he will reach back to watches that are not available anymore, use that design language, and create a beautiful watch that's very accessible. And one of the ones that the most recent tag, when I saw it, man, why I like it? Because it looks exactly like my Dan Henry 1964. But once the Carrera just came out, or this new 60th anniversary, you go like, well, now it's a copy of a watch that is readily available. And now I'm struggling. Yeah. But it's not necessarily readily available. I think they're only making something like 60 of them, and they're $7,000. So
the 60th anniversary Carrera is a limited edition of 600.
600, okay.
At 7,400. So it's up against some very strong competition.
Yeah.
At that price point.
If you go to the 1964, Sam, you'll see one that looks a lot like this new Tag Heuer. And there's a 3-dial. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Looks a lot like it. But I do love that watch.
Yeah. Yeah, we've so let me just remove that. We've got some good comments coming in from the audience. The first one is Orange Hand says on his criteria for is a watch legitimate, it's original identifiable design, quality of movement, style, and wearability. So we've definitely gone over the identifiable design, haven't we? But quality of movement, that's an interesting one, isn't it? That's something I definitely think about as well. As a quality movement. That's what puts me off mid-range Seikos.
This is actually one of the areas where I get a bit purist and say, actually, that's not true. You don't care about quality of movement, and you don't care about robustness, and you don't care about accuracy. Because if you did, you'd ditch all your mechanical stuff and you'd go for quartz, because quartz always wins. As soon as you choose mechanical, you have turned your back on ultimate timekeeping, ultimate longevity and robustness and all of those things. You have chosen something artisanal and crafty and arty at the expense of ultimate capability.
There are
So
Swiss assassins coming for you now, Pete.
actually, there was a designer from Breitling who actually said exactly the same thing on a podcast recently, talking about the Formex, sort of bendy case, that thing that's got the shock absorber built into it.
The essence.
And they were saying, oh, wasn't this a really clever way of getting around the problem? And he said, no, it's stupid. You should just use quartz.
Well, and Swiss makes some great quartzes. There's some great quartz
Exactly.
movements. The Swiss movements are great.
And so that's where I'm okay with the idea that you want the best possible mechanical watch because you're into the art of the mechanical. But don't pretend this has got anything to do with timekeeping or toolishness. This is purely just you getting off on the idea of some little man hammering away at something you want.
This is another T-shirt idea here.
Although the intellectual property cynic in me does say that Breitling found out how much Formex were charging to license the patent and had a sulk.
No. It's actually got to do with the way they've structured. And in there, he said quite specifically, there will never be a mechanical watch in our professional collection. The professional collection, a professional who needs a watch to tell the time should only ever have quartz. There will never be a mechanical watch in our professional collection.
Yeah, interesting. We got quite a good comment here from to counter your Dan Henry one. Says Dan Henry is the Quentin Tarantino of watches.
Tarantino makes some great movies too. Okay.
Yeah, and he does, and that's what he is. So a lot of it is a homage, especially Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is one of my favorites he's ever done. It is a homage to a love letter, don't they? In films, it's a love letter, isn't it? Instead of homage to Hollywood. And then
so my Dan Henry's a love letter to Tag.
Yeah, it's a love letter.
Perfect.
And then Sam D says here, what do you guys think about watches from companies like Artisan Genève or Skeleton Concepts? So, I mean, I follow Artisans de Genève on Instagram, and they are making some like incredible. If anybody's not familiar, Artisans de Genève take Rolexes. Not Bamford does this as well, but Artisans de Genève take Rolexes and they just one up them to the next level. They put sapphire. They're all different, but they sometimes put sapphire dials on them. They refinish the movements to make them a lot more pretty looking. They skeletonize Rolexes as well. They put a moon phase on a Submariner. They make some incredible watches, but that's not really a homage, is it, or a counterfeiter, is it? They are enhancing them. So who wants to take that one? What do we think of Artisans de Genève?
I think we know that Rolex's lawyers aren't impressed.
It's kind of like the watch version of those car guys, right? The guys who like chop up, and change the car and add zero resale value to that car. But it's cool looking.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see if I can find something that's in French here. But yeah, they did an amazing. No.
And to be said, they probably just ruined the value of the Rolex. Really, it's cool.
Well,
from a value standpoint.
Yeah, but having said that, they do limited editions. They did one with Spike Lee, a Daytona called Cool Hand Brooklyn. So they do collaborations with celebrities, and they do a lot with race car drivers as well.
Yeah,
so
I think I love them. I think they're the the rough or the singer of like they're Porsche personalizers. They're fantastic. They don't pretend. The big difference is they're not pretending that they're producing a Rolex. If you don't accidentally get scammed by someone sending you an Artisans de Genève watch. If I went to buy a Daytona and that thing turned up in the mail instead, I'd be over the moon. I wouldn't be ringing the cops. I think there's possibly the massive difference. I think the jury is going to be out on whether the jury will be out for some decades over what the impact on the value of these things is. Right now, today, short term, you're absolutely right, Rick. It sort of degrades the value. But you try and buy like a 1950s Maserati with a one-off, just made for one customer Zagato bodywork, and you've tripled the price of that car. I think in the long run, the idea that this is a one, particularly if it's made for someone special, these things could be worth 100 times a standard version. If you're able to get LeBron James's Daytona that was made for him by these guys, it'll be worth astronomical amounts.
LeBron's probably a good example, but then and especially in the way how fickle that is in celebrity. If you have it attached to a celebrity that now does something that makes them persona non grata in the public eye, that makes it even worse probably, because now you go, oh, no one's going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Although I could be wrong.
Someone bought Hitler's watch.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, I suppose a good one on this one is, TJ, you really love your tool watches, don't you? And you used watches as proper tools for a long time. What's your opinion on, because arguably the Submariner is a tool watch, and so is the Daytona.
Well, I like what Pete's point, that if you're going to use a mechanical watch, you're accepting already that you didn't choose the best tool. But that doesn't mean that you may not still choose to do that and say, well, within the limits of mechanical, which I love, I'm going to, try to find the best. Having said that, I wouldn't fly when I flew with mechanical watches. I did on occasion just to create a memory with them or take a wrist shot. But, the best tools I flew with were all quartzes, just because I couldn't bother to have this inaccurate thing that was 8 seconds off or 16 seconds off or anything like that. And I wanted more features than you could get. So, the reason why my IWC is awesome right now as a Grail is because I'm not flying anymore, and it doesn't matter if I'm 8 seconds off. But it still matters to me that it's only 2 seconds off, because I had a watch that was about 15 seconds off, and I just found it was too much. I would constantly feel compelled to correct it. And so it does matter to me within the context of it being mechanical, that's about as accurate as I can get it, and that it is robust and doesn't get magnetized by an iPad. So I do care about those practical features. But more than anything, I care about those features from the point of view of the legitimacy of the brand and what they're offering. So if like IWC is a good example, they're producing $7,000, $10,000 chronographs right now, but they are super legible. I really like the ceramic material, and I would fly with it. I get it. It's not the most accurate thing in the world because it's mechanical, but it's outstanding. They clearly are trying to make something that you could still use in a cockpit. So it's not just marketing. They are paying attention to the right things, and that's what it is. If you're just making something that's aviation inspired, that's fine. But if you're gonna really hype up your marketing that this is a pilot's watch, then it better be. You better have talked to some aviators about what they want. Sangin did that. They're a micro brand. They made an aviator's watch. It's quartz, no surprise, but it has everything that I would have asked for. So, even with mechanicals, it all depends what your focus is. It's just, for me, it's about the tool utility, and all I ask for is don't make a design that sort of directly opposes the purpose that your marketing says the watch is for. Just be consistent. The watch that we saw that was a much harder to read chronograph, that the one that Todd showed that had the little subdials, I have no issue with that. Clearly they're not making that for a military pilot. but it's a beautiful thing that's honoring a tradition, and it's respecting an old design. And I think that's legit, because it's not trying to be something than it actually is. It's not, there's no lie there. And that's what I don't like. I don't like the smoke and mirrors and the BS and the, look, check out this chronograph. And then, the ad shows a pilot, in some inaccurate flight suit. And then you look and you see like, wow, I could actually not use that. That's where I get upset.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We should give a little shout out to Sangin Watches, shouldn't we, as well? I know just Jason from Watch Rolling, he's a big fan of this brand as well.
I'm curious too on the from the tool watch perspective though, and this is a very small case use, I know, but being quartz could be an issue as NASA goes into the deep space travel. And when you get a year out and now my battery died, I have a problem with quartz. Whereas if I can wind it every morning, I have a watch that keeps working with me. So unless by the time we're doing that, we have a battery that lasts 20 years, that's a different conversation.
Let's just say that if you're on like a deep space mission and you run out of power to recharge your watch, you've got way bigger problems than you couldn't wind it.
Well, that's going to be a different power source then. We're charging it as opposed to a battery.
Well, isn't that just a solar watch?
Yeah, sure.
That's what I would choose there. Yeah, solar,
yeah.
I'd bring a Speedmaster mechanical with me. There's a certain weight allowance the astronauts will have, and I think they're going to have to cut out their appendix before they go out if they still have theirs, so they got a little extra weight. They can trade their appendix for a Speedmaster, maybe. That was one of the interesting things about those deep missions to Mars. Like they're going to have to think about.
It's a long, and when you're there, you got to wait for everything to line back up just to come back to Earth. It's not.
Yeah, that's what they used to do for Antarctic missions. I think you had a preemptive whatever it is.
Appendectomy.
Appendectomy. Yeah. That's the one.
That's the Antarctica's the analog that NASA studies. Yeah. It makes sense.
Right. We've got a couple more questions coming through. So Canadian Watch Monkey says, Oris is truly a brand that does things their own way. Pull up the Oris 1917 and you'll agree. So let's pull that up. So here we go. So this is a trench watch, or certainly looks like a trench watch, but it's in 40 mil. I wasn't aware of this watch. So this is certainly a homage to vintage trench watches, but it's certainly not a homage to Oris, are they? Because I don't think they were around since.
No, I don't believe so.
1904 for Oris, I think.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. They're older than you think. Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose. I mean, and I'm not an Oris expert, and I'm not deeply into the lore of like World War I watches, but if you took Oris off the dial and put Longines on that, would anyone think it was out of place?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
and that's not that's not like having a go at Oris. The reality is, I've got a little Alpina and a little Mido that are both from 1920, and they're essentially identical because that's how watches were made. One company made all the cases, and one company made all the hands, and you sort of picked and matched. So I'm not necessarily throwing rocks at Oris for saying that could just as easily be a Longines. That it could just as easily be a Longines is probably historically accurate.
Yeah, you're right, and that's the other flip side of the homage, isn't it? Where if you're thinking of homage purely as we are paying respects to another design or moving a design forward. I mean, moving a design forward that is a very important part of watchmaking, isn't it? Where someone's like, oh, that's a good design. I think we could do that a little bit better. And then you're moving it on. You're adopting these things, probably like the first bezel that everybody saw use in that. So then bezel started appearing and so on and so on and so on. In fact, Jack's put here, we as a community express disdain for homage watches, but as a community, make it low-hanging fruit for watchmakers, easy money for them. I don't know. What's everyone think on that one?
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. I think the community, I keep meaning to run a poll on my channel about this. I think the community splits pretty hard, pro versus anti-Homage. There's a huge group of people who love them, who swear by them. We're probably going to get into the next part of this topic where we talk about the importance of branding.
Yep.
Those people are going to say, I don't care about the brand. I don't care about any of this other stuff. Just give me the specs, give me the look, and make it as cheap as you can. And their argument would be all this namby-pamby, snowflakey, new age authenticity stuff you guys are talking about. You're just being sheeple, bought by the market, buying into the marketing. They would be disdainful of our disdain for their homages.
Reverse snobbery, is that what that is?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, you also
in a way.
You also have the idea that a lot of the releases and what the community says it wants is backward looking. There's very little forward looking enthusiasm for watches. So whether you're talking about the Blanc Power 50 Fathoms from 1953, Oris for now 1917, I don't blame the brands for looking in their back catalogs, because it saves them having to design something new, and they know that there is a large market for backward looking watches.
You're right. Yeah, I would
don't blame the manufacturers at all.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to spend several thousand on a new watch that's not been released yet, you can guarantee it looks like a watch that's already been released. Those are the ones that get me excited. If Nicholas at Fears, shout out to Nicholas, if he remade one of those Fears divers from when the original company was going, I'd be all over that. It literally would be take my money. Like if it was sort of a more contemporary size and looked the same, that's what gets me. That's what would get me excited more than perhaps a newer. I think it's the same when the Seiko, the 62 MAS looking watches came out. They were kind of they kind of revolutionized the Seiko high-end dive watches for a little bit, didn't they?
But it also puts up a barrier to entry to new competition.
Absolutely. But I think there's
because unless you're doing something like Armin Strom or MB&F, you're almost forced as a new competitor to look back at somebody else's catalog, and then one of the criticisms you'll get is that you have no heritage. I mean, the marketing guy that came up with that was a genius. He found a way to neuter new competition without spending any money at all.
Yeah. And I'll freely admit, I'll pick that rock up and throw it. That's one of the reasons why I really struggle to get emotionally involved in any kind of micro brand, because it's really hard. But on the other hand, one of the few micro brands I have kind of got into is Boulder, and I loved that when their first Globetrotter came out, their GMT, it was not. I can't think of it being similar to anything else. It's not so much that one, more the older version, although that's not a bad example of it. It's in the hand. It's the closest analog I can come up with is actually a piece of architecture. It's like those big Nazi flak towers that are so huge they actually can't afford to knock them down in Vienna. It's just this big brutalist chunk of steel. And I loved it, and it was unique and not like anything else. And ever since they brought that out, they've kind of been softening the language and moving back towards everyone else, which is one of the reasons why I haven't bought you more Boulders.
And I think, when I started getting into watches, I wasn't aware of the heritage argument because the watch media and so on hadn't developed at that point. So I got into watches before I learned that there was heritage even there, and I still don't care very much about it.
Yeah, we've got super chat coming in. So Canadian Watch Monkey, thank you so much for the generous super chat. It says provenance is something I put high value on.
Right.
Yeah,
I do. Oh, I'm sorry, Sam.
No, sorry. After you talk.
Yeah. So jumping on Provenance, I'm with Pete. So I've got more show and tell. So, what is the history of the company? What has it done? Where is it now? and what is it doing for me now? So here's a original, though it's not functional. This is from a Seiko from World War II. This would have been in the cockpit and on the wrist of a pilot. So this is a pilot's watch. It's tiny. I can't imagine. They must have had, the Japanese pilots must have had like 2015 vision, because this is awful. And this would have a case around it that you would wear on your wrist. I don't have that case. I'm going to try to find one. But in the cockpit of the aircraft, you would pull it out of the case, it kind of sandwiched, and you put this into your flight dashboard, like, you know, for the back end, and you have it. This would be your timer in the aircraft. And then if we look at, you know, things that have been unique, like this, of course, my favorite, right? Here's one of the first blue 6139s that Seiko made during the automatic chronograph. I put my face there. It seems to work better. Automatic chronograph race, right? And so this is from April of 1969. So it was, you know, right there. And so this means something, right? This was part of some large effort in order to technologically move things along. And then, oh, here's a history book on it, written by a gentleman in Japan. He has interviews with Hatare about, in the front, like, what were you thinking when you designed that watch? I mean, you know, what design decisions did you do, and that sort of thing. And to me, that makes, you know, a huge amount of difference in terms of what I am, like Pete said, what I'm emotionally attracted to. Omega, Hamilton, you know, I'll throw Hamilton out here too. Here's the mechanism from one of the original pocket watches. It probably was all gold, so it got melted down, like Patrick was talking about. Look at that work. You know, this is one of the railroad standards. I think it's the 912 movement, one of the railroad standards. These were built so that trains wouldn't crash into each other. I mean, military watches. I have a UK Seiko, for example, RAF one. Oh, here's one. So this is from World War II too. I'm really proud of this one. So if you read your kanji, which I can't, means artillery timer. So inside is this. And this is an original. There we go. I actually got it to work with the background. Original Seiko World War II artillery timer in just awesome shape, which means it probably didn't see any action. But guess what? I have no idea of the service history. It works.
Yeah,
you can even hear it. You can even hear it tick, and it keeps great time. Boom, boom. I mean, that to me means a whole bunch. That I struggle with younger brands. Now, Christopher Ward, I will say, is doing something. They're innovating in their own way now. So they, to me, are establishing their own branding and their own heritage right now. And I'm cool. And I love that, which is why I ordered a Bel Canto. But yeah, Seiko Todd is not. But anyhow, so I'm sorry for droning on, but to me, things like that are critical. Was it in space? Was it used in the military? What did it do? What was its purpose in life other than to sit on somebody's wrist? And to me, that makes a big difference.
Hey, Todd, can you show that sport chronograph again from Seiko? I read
69?
I read a blue one. Yep, that one. A autobiography of a B-52 navigator from Vietnam, and he said those were super popular because you could get them at the PX in Japan on your way down to Guam, or wherever they were based out of. And we had a little memorial to an aviator that was a prisoner of war up in Whidbey Island at our officers club, and his watch with the gold style was up there. So
with the original, like the Pose, the gold one,
So even though it was not made for that, it has a history, just like the Speedmaster wasn't made for space anyway. But sometimes watches take on a stamp of legitimacy by who found it and who used it and what stories are associated with it.
Was it in this? Was it on somebody's wrist that went in this thing? Yes, then that makes a big difference to me. Just then that's me. Some people don't care about that, but I do.
No, I definitely care about that. I like that history because it especially because it brings back the idea. I think it's the romance that to Pete's point, that a time when these watches were actual tools, when that's the best they had. Like I would love to own a Comex Submariner because they were actually saturation divers wore those, or the I know John over at Tea and Tickers is a huge fan of the mil spec ones, especially the Rolex mil sub and stuff like that. I like that history to them. That's what I find authentic.
Yeah, let's talk about history of Seiko divers. Right here. Let's go into where the 62 Mas came from. Let's go to where the Marine Master went and all that, and the background to that. To your point exactly. That's great.
Yes.
Stuff.
And Orange Hand says real provenance is truly collectible. Reproduced or manufactured provenance, not so much. And I think that's where my authenticity thing.
Yeah, for Orange Hand, I can't resist. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do this. So here's my Heuer calculator. This is a caliber 14. This is part of the original Project 99 work that they did with Hamilton and with Breitling, and this orange. I mean, come on, how can you just not love the history that went into this watch? This is from '72, so it was a little bit after. How could you not love what went into all of that?
But if you're going to stick that closely to the heritage, then don't forget there are only ever 12 moon watches. Those were the watches that landed on the moon.
you can't get those. They're owned by the government, though.
There's
one of them lost.
There's
one of them's lost.
One of them's lost. And then if you want to expand the argument, you can say, well, how many watches got into lunar orbit? That way you can add the 3 from Apollo 13, the 3 from Apollo 8, plus the other 6. And there may be some more. Everything else is a copy. And in fact, now it's a far away copy,
This is kind of where the issue of provenance becomes a bit like an elastic band, and each of us decides where it snaps.
Yep.
If you are someone who buys watches at auction, and provenance for you is not the design or the manufacturer, but is the individual who wore that specific serial number in a specific place, then well done you. You've had a very successful business life. And B, your elastic will snap really fast. You're after 3, or as you say, maybe 12 watches in the world. Other people will say, they'll go to the other end. Their elastic will stretch to, I don't care if it comes out of some Chinese, mushroom brand. As long as it looks the same, that's all I'm after. Most people will fit somewhere in the middle. We're not Russian oligarchs. We can't, rely on the fact that we've found Buzz Aldrin's watch. That's just unrealistic. That's fantasy land. So for us, provenance exists somewhere in the middle. It comes from the same company. It has some kind of relationship. And I think that's where most of us fit. We're not arguing that it has to have been worn by the astronaut. I don't think there'd be many people here that are necessarily happy that it comes from some nameless Chinese mushroom brand. We fit somewhere in the middle. And we just argue about where in the middle we fit.
Well, this is it taps into a very recent controversy that was going on with that Brick watch company, because he walked right into an issue by trying to start with a $2,400 watch that had no provenance and is not worth anywhere near that, and was a little surprised that there was backlash.
I don't know the story there well, and when I say I don't know the story there well, and I intellectually have read it and everything, but I have a suspicion that to really understand the story, you have to be American and you have to know something about this guy. Yeah, because see, I knew nothing about Barstool Sports. I know nothing about him. I know nothing about the controversy. But as soon as I looked into it, I just thought, this is a whole Joe Rogan style. People aren't buying the watch; they're buying me kind of thing. Yeah. And he's a dick. So I don't know why anyone would do that.
These t-shirt ideas are
That
Before we
flowery
carry on,
language again.
Canadian Watch Monkey, thank you so much again for the super chat. Oh, very gratefully received. He's just saying that I'm good with reissues from the original brand.
Yeah,
I agree with that, because otherwise it's tragic if an older design isn't made. In fact, the reason I bought my watch used is because I met a guy from IWC at the Tailhook convention, and I told him how much I love the Mark 11, and he said, "Yeah, the tribute watch had already been made, 1948 of them." He said, "We're not doing that again. That's something we owe to the people that bought the limited edition." And I said, "Looks like I'm going to have to go to get one that's used," and that's how I did it. But it's a tragic if you love the design, you're waiting for the company to go back and put it out again, because otherwise you are going to have to buy it from someone else who's making an homage of it, and maybe you don't want to do that. So I like reissues.
There's some argument to be made of that's the success of, and Pete's going to hate this, but the success of the Rolex watch brand. They don't really change much because people love that and they will sell them, and there's a waiting list for them for 10 years from now to have that watch. They don't want it to change. So that's part of their success.
Oh, I don't deny that Rolex has got a very, very obviously, you'd have to live in Fantasyland to imagine that Rolex has not made money, not made bank out of their philosophy. I do find it interesting to what kind of watchmaker. I'm into watches. I love watches. I want to do everything I possibly can in watches and really make a mark. How does that person feel after working at Rolex for 5 years?
Oh yeah. Okay, sure.
And that's when I start asking, what kind of person can work at Rolex for 20 years, can work at for 30 years? Can you truly be a watch person and work at a company that never changes?
And then and I think it's something that Pete said in one of his videos. If the watch design from Rolex is as incremental as it is, how do you get a normal person to buy a second one? Because you can take a Submariner from the 90s. It looks essentially the same as a Submariner now. As long as you keep it serviced, why would you buy a second one? Whereas if you look at a Seamaster from the 90s and a Seamaster now, they're different. So you have an incentive to go into the shop and look for a second one if you like it.
You're going to buy the solid gold one, and you're going to buy the platinum one, and you're going to buy the green one.
Well, because most normal Rolex owners, and that's nobody on this call and nobody in the comments, buy one because
you're right. They're one and done, aren't they? Yeah,
that's true.
They have that celebration. It's their retirement. It's their wedding anniversary, the birth of their child, whatever it is. And you look at the testimonies. It's like, I saved for this watch for 10 years. I bought it for my retirement. I'm so happy. I'm never buying another one. How do you get someone to buy a second?
I think Rolex is, well, first off, there are people who buy multiples because there's weirdos like us. Right. And I think Rolex has realized that's an issue for them, which is why they don't produce any more watches. I remember when I first got involved in this topic, like in this hobby years ago, and the talk was Rolex makes about 1 million watches a year. And here we are many, many years later, and Rolex is still making about $1 million watches a year. They haven't increased production at all. But what's fascinating,
that might be changing. They have got.
I don't think it will. I don't think it will. No, I don't. I think what they are doing is still selling one and dones, but they're selling them at vastly higher prices. And so if you looked at like the Morgan and Stanley thing, which is always a bit tricky, we've got to be careful how much credence you put on that. But that showed the big change that happened for Rolex turnover between 2020 and 2021 was a 40% increase in the average implied retail price of Rolexes. That's why you're getting two-tone Explorers. That's why I'll guarantee you there will be a full gold Explorer shortly. There will be full gold everything. There will be jewels on everything. Because Rolex is still only going to make $1 million, 1 million watches a year. Maybe they'll increase it a tiny amount. So how do you grow? You make your watches cost more. Mark my words, there will be a full gold Explorer. And this is where I come back to. This is where I come back, TJ, to say what kind of person works long term at Rolex.
Right.
They've become an asset utilization and a marketing company rather than a watchmaker. I think, you know, they've learned that margin is everything. They've learned to maximize their assets, get 100% use out of their precious metals foundry, and then how to sell that to the wider world.
I've said it many times, is that Rolex is a marketing company that makes a very good watch, and the converse, let's say, is Omega is a watchmaker, horology maker, or horologist,
But
let's
they
say,
suck at
company
marketing.
that does pretty good marketing.
No, they suck.
I disagree with you, Todd.
Suck.
I think they suck. I think their marketing is appalling. I don't think anyone from Swatch knows how to sell a watch.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, you might be wrong.
Make a great watch, no idea how to sell it.
Absolutely. Well, any final points on that? We blasted through that hour. That was awesome.
Fun.
Oh wow!
Yeah, that was really cool. Thanks to the panel. Before we go, in an hour's time, if you're watching this live, I'm doing a whatnot sale. So here you can see it here, fantastic handmade straps. So I'm going to be selling some of the man cave leather straps that I've got, some of the watch straps that I've got, all going to go to a good cause. So if you enjoyed the last whatnot auction I did, or if you're new to it, sign up to whatnot. You'll be able to bid live. It'll be like a live stream. I'll be doing an hour, and then you can buy them, and then obviously bid on them. And if you win them, I'll be posting them out on Tuesday. So whatnot auction coming up, and I forgot to mention it at the start. So anyone that stuck around, thank you so much. But just that's a little plug for me. But a big thanks to the panel. Thanks TJ for joining us. Thanks Pete, Mark, Seiko, Todd, who lived up to his name.
For sure.
and Todd from TikTok Talk on Instagram. Thanks everyone. Thanks panel, and thanks everyone for being so active in the comments, and thanks for the super chats, very generously received. Bye everyone.